Picture this for a moment. It's late afternoon, the sun is starting to dip low in the sky, and you're 16 years old. You've just finished the most brutal basketball practice of your life. Your legs feel like jelly, your shirt is soaked with sweat, and all you want to do is get home, take a shower, and maybe grab something to eat. But then your phone dies. The bus you always take. You missed it. And suddenly, that easy ride home becomes a long walk through neighborhoods where you just know, people are going to notice you. This is where our story begins. Not with villains or heroes, but with a teenage boy named Marcus Thompson, walking home on what should have been just another ordinary Tuesday. Willowbrook Heights. Even the name sounds expensive, doesn't it? This is one of those neighborhoods in Denver where every lawn looks like it was trimmed with scissors, where Tesla cars glide silently down streets lined with trees that were probably planted by a professional landscaping crew. These are the kinds of homes you see in magazines, colonial-style houses with bay windows, 3-car garages, and security systems that would make Fort Knox jealous. Everything has its place here. And more importantly, everyone knows exactly where they belong. Marcus Thompson knew this neighborhood, though. His teammate Jake lived on Maple Street, just a few blocks over. They'd spent countless summer afternoons shooting hoops in Jake's driveway, arguing about whether LeBron or Jordan was the GOAT, sharing dreams about maybe playing college ball someday. But walking through Willowbrook Heights alone, that was different. Marcus could feel it in the way his shoulders tensed slightly, the way he found himself walking just a little straighter, a little more carefully. He wasn't doing anything wrong, he was just walking home, for crying out loud, but he knew how it might look to the people watching from behind their perfectly clean windows. And trust me, people were watching. Marcus adjusted the strap on his Nike duffel bag. Inside were his basketball shoes, still warm and damp with sweat, his practice jersey that his mom would probably make him wash separately, a half-empty water bottle, and his geometry textbook, because even star point guards have homework on Tuesday nights. He pulled out his earbuds, hoping some music might help him relax, might make this walk feel less like he was on display. But even with the beat thumping in his ears, he couldn't shake that feeling. You know the one I'm talking about. That feeling when you know you're being watched, when you know people are making assumptions about you before you even open your mouth. Now let me tell you about Carol Whitfield. Carol's not a bad person. I want you to understand that from the start. She volunteers at the local library. She recycles religiously. She even has a coexist bumper sticker on her Subaru. If you asked her neighbors, they'd tell you she's friendly, helpful, the kind of person who brings you soup when you're sick. Carol had been living on Elm Street for 12 years. 12 years of watching the same routines, the same faces, the same predictable patterns that made Willowbrook Heights feel safe and familiar. She could tell you that Mrs. Patterson walked her golden retriever at exactly 6 a.m. every morning, that the teenager from the blue house always got picked up by his mom in a silver Honda at 3:30, that the mail truck arrived between 11 and noon every single day. This Tuesday afternoon, Carol was in her kitchen, watering her orchids, these beautiful purple and white flowers she'd been nurturing for months. She was actually humming to herself, thinking about what to make for dinner, when she glanced out her bay window and saw him. A young man. Tall, athletic build, black, wearing a red hoodie and shorts, carrying what looked like a gym bag. Walking down her street with a purpose, but also looking around. The way people look around when they're checking things out, when they're paying attention to details. Carol's first thought, and she'd be honest about this later, when she was forced to really examine herself, her first thought wasn't curiosity. It wasn't, I wonder if he's visiting someone or maybe he's new to the neighborhood. Her first thought was concern. But here's where it gets complicated, and this is important. Carol genuinely believed she was being responsible. She told herself she was being a good neighbor, a good citizen. She looked at Marcus walking down her street, and her brain started spinning stories. What if he was casing houses? What if he was looking for unlocked cars? What if she ignored this feeling in her gut and tomorrow morning she woke up to police sirens and news vans because someone 3 houses down had been robbed? She watched as Marcus paused to check his phone, though she didn't know his phone was dead. She watched as he adjusted his bag strap, though she didn't know it was heavy with basketball gear. She watched him look around, though she didn't know he was just trying to remember which street would get him home fastest. And with every second she watched, that nagging feeling grew stronger. Carol reached for her iPhone. Her fingers hesitated over the screen for just a moment. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe she was, but no. Better safe than sorry, right? Better to be cautious than to ignore her instincts and regret it later. She dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, the way voices sound when they've answered thousands of these calls and know how to keep people focused. Carol's voice was slightly shaky when she answered. Hi, I'd like to report suspicious activity in my neighborhood. Can you tell me what you're seeing? There's a young man walking down my street, and I don't know, he's looking around like he's checking out houses or something. I've lived here for 12 years, and I've never seen him before. Can you describe this person? Carol glanced out the window again. Marcus was still walking, still just trying to get home. He's tall, black, wearing a red hoodie and shorts. He's carrying a large bag. This is normally a very quiet street, and something just feels off about this. Now here's the question that should have stopped everything. Is he doing anything illegal or threatening? Carol paused. Because the honest answer was no. Marcus wasn't breaking into cars. He wasn't looking into windows. He wasn't threatening anyone. He was walking. Walking while black in a neighborhood where that apparently felt suspicious to someone watching from behind a window. Well, no, Carol admitted. Not exactly. But something just feels off about it. And somehow, that was enough. That feeling, that assumption, that fear of what might happen rather than what was actually happening, that was enough to set everything in motion. Within minutes, Officers Patricia Hayes and Michael Chen were in their patrol car, heading toward Willowbrook Heights. They'd gotten a call about a possible prowler, a young black male with a bag, acting suspicious in an affluent neighborhood. They had no way of knowing they were about to stop the son of one of the most powerful federal judges in Colorado. They had no way of knowing that Marcus Thompson was a straight-A student who tutored kids at the community center and had never been in trouble with the law in his entire life. All they knew was that someone had called 911, and they had a job to do. Marcus had just turned onto Oak Street when he heard it. That distinctive wail of police sirens that makes your stomach drop even when you know you haven't done anything wrong. He glanced back, assuming they were heading to some emergency further down the road. But then the patrol car pulled up right beside him. The lights, red and blue, flashing bright against the late afternoon sun, painted the perfect suburban street in colors that didn't belong there. Marcus felt his heart rate spike as both car doors flew open. Hey, stop right there. Officer Hayes stepped out first, her hand instinctively positioned near her service weapon. Her partner, Chen, emerged from the driver's side, and suddenly Marcus was caught between them, flanked on both sides. Marcus slowly pulled out his earbuds. Everything his parents had ever taught him about encounters like this came flooding back. Move slowly. Keep your hands visible. Be respectful. Do everything right, and maybe, you'll get home safely. Is there a problem, officers? His voice was steady, but inside, his mind was racing. What's in the bag? Hayes demanded. My basketball gear. I just finished practice. Chen stepped closer, his eyes scanning Marcus from head to toe like he was memoizing details for a report. You live around here? Yes, sir. About 8 blocks that way. Marcus gestured toward his family's home, toward safety that suddenly felt very far away. Hayes scoffed. 8 blocks. That's not exactly around here, is it? And there it was. The assumption that he didn't belong, that 8 blocks might as well be 8 miles when you're a black teenager in the wrong neighborhood. What's your address? Hayes pressed. As Marcus started to recite his street address, Chen reached for his duffel bag. Mind if we take a look? I'd rather you didn't. But Chen was already unzipping the bag, rifling through Marcus's personal belongings like he had every right to do so. Basketball shoes. A jersey still damp with sweat. A water bottle. Deodorant. His geometry textbook. Nothing illegal. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that should have warranted this stop in the first place. Why are you cutting through this neighborhood? Hayes asked. Marcus felt his patience wearing thin, but he forced himself to stay calm. It's a shortcut. I missed my bus, and my phone died, so I couldn't call for a ride. The truth. The simple, innocent truth of a teenager trying to get home after basketball practice. Chen found Marcus's student ID in the bag's side pocket and examined it. Jefferson High, here? That's pretty far from here. I know kids who live in this area, Marcus replied. I come here sometimes. The officers exchanged one of those looks. You know, the kind, silent communication that happens between people who work together, who think they understand something you don't. Marcus couldn't interpret that look, but he definitely didn't like it. Hayes was about to say something else when they all heard it, the sound of a powerful engine approaching fast. A sleek black Range Rover rounded the corner, moving with the kind of urgency that suggested the driver had somewhere very important to be. The SUV came to a stop with authority rather than panic. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman who commanded attention the moment her heels hit the pavement. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. His mom was here. But Officers Hayes and Chen had no idea who had just arrived. They had no idea that the woman walking toward them with such purpose and authority was Dr. Angela Thompson, federal judge, one of the most powerful people in Denver's legal system. They were about to find out, and Carol Whitfield, still watching from her window, was about to discover exactly who she had called the police on. The real story was just beginning. You know that moment in a movie when everything shifts? When the music changes, when you realize the story you thought you were watching is actually something completely different. That's exactly what was about to happen on Oak Street in Willowbrook Heights. Because the woman stepping out of that black Range Rover wasn't just any concerned mother rushing to help her son. She was Dr. Angela Thompson, federal judge, one of the most powerful people in Colorado's legal system. A woman who had spent her career making decisions that shaped lives, who had been interviewed on CNN, who had twice been mentioned as a potential Supreme Court candidate. But right now, she was just a mom who had gotten a frantic phone call from a neighbor saying her son was being stopped by police. Let me paint you a picture of Angela Thompson. At 4 to 5, she carried herself with the kind of authority that comes from years of commanding courtrooms filled with lawyers who tried to intimidate her, politicians who underestimated her, and defendants who thought they could outsmart her. She stepped out of that Range Rover wearing a sharp navy blazer and heels that clicked against the asphalt with purpose. Not running, not panicked, but moving with the controlled urgency of someone who was used to walking into rooms where people doubted her authority, and then reminding them exactly who she was. Officer Hayes looked up as Angela approached, and you could see recognition dawning slowly across her face. She'd seen this woman on the news, maybe even voted for her in some election, but it took her brain a moment to catch up to the situation. We're in the middle of an investigation, Hayes said, trying to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly slipping away from her. I need you to maintain your distance. Angela's eyebrows rose slightly, the kind of expression she probably gave lawyers who made particularly ridiculous arguments in her courtroom. An investigation? Into what, exactly? Chen gestured toward Marcus, who was still standing there with his hands visible, still being the perfect example of how to behave during a police stop, still doing everything his parents had taught him to do to stay safe. We received a report of suspicious activity. We're just asking this young man some questions. Now, here's where Angela Thompson, the federal judge, merged perfectly with Angela Thompson, the mother. She pulled out her phone with the kind of deliberate calm that comes from years of dealing with people who think they can waste her time. She scrolled through her photos and held up her phone. On the screen was a picture from just last month, herself and Marcus at the courthouse's Bring Your Child to Work Day, both of them smiling in her chambers, Marcus wearing a tie that was probably a little too big for him, looking proud to be there with his mom. This young man, Angela said, her voice cutting through the suburban afternoon air, is my son, Marcus Thompson. This is his school ID, showing his address, which is 8 blocks from here. Would you like to see our property records as well? The silence that followed was the kind of silence you can feel. Heavy, uncomfortable. The kind of silence where everyone realizes that something has gone very, very wrong. Hayes shifted from foot to foot. Chen suddenly found his notepad incredibly interesting. And somewhere behind them, Carol Whitfield stood frozen in her doorway, watching her worst nightmare unfold in real time. Because she had just realized exactly who she had called the police on. Angela wasn't done. Not even close. You have to understand, this woman had spent her entire career fighting for justice, presiding over cases that dealt with civil rights, discrimination, the kind of systemic issues that she thought she could help fix from the bench. And now she was standing in her own neighborhood, watching her son get treated like a criminal for the crime of walking home. She took a measured step forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried all the authority of someone who had spent years making decisions that changed people's lives. Did my son threaten anyone? She asked. No, Hayes admitted. Did he damage any property? No. Did he trespass on anyone's land? No, but... Angela cut her off. Then please explain to me what crime you suspected him of committing that warranted searching his personal belongings and detaining him on a public street. Hayes straightened up, trying to regain some semblance of control. We received a call from a concerned citizen reporting suspicious behavior. Suspicious behavior, Angela repeated slowly, letting those words hang in the air like an accusation. Such as? Neither officer had an answer for that. Because what could they say? That Marcus had been walking. That he'd been carrying a gym bag. That he'd looked around while he walked. Angela's gaze moved past the officers to the house where she could see a figure partially hidden behind the front door, clearly watching the entire interaction unfold. Was it you? Angela called out, her voice carrying across the perfectly manicured lawn. Carol Whitfield felt her face flush red. She had recognized Angela Thompson the moment she stepped out of that Range Rover. The realization of what she had done, calling the police on a federal judge's son, made her stomach churn with embarrassment and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name yet. Carol began, then stopped. What could she possibly say? That she had profiled a teenager based on his race and her own fears. That she had potentially put a young man in danger because he didn't look like he belonged in her neighborhood. You called 911, Angela stated, her voice cutting through the suburban afternoon like a blade, because a black teenager was walking down your street. A teenager who was doing nothing wrong, bothering no one, simply trying to get home. Carol looked down at her feet. The accusation hung in the air, true and completely indefensible. Angela turned back to the officers, and her voice took on that edge that probably made experienced attorneys nervous in her courtroom. Do you realize what could have happened here? Do you understand that you stopped, questioned, and searched my son based on nothing more than someone's bias and fear? Chen shifted uncomfortably. Look, Judge Thompson, we were just responding to a call. We have to investigate reports we receive. Do you? Angela asked. Because last I checked, walking while black wasn't a crime in Colorado. The comment hit its target. Both officers knew she was right. They had acted on implicit bias, following up on a call that never should have been made in the first place. Hayes cleared her throat, eager to end this uncomfortable encounter. If there's no issue here, we'll be on our way. Angela stared at her for a long moment. You could see the disbelief in her eyes, the frustration of someone who dealt with justice every day and was watching it fail right in front of her. No issue, she said. My son was treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood. A neighbor called the police because she made assumptions about him based on his race. And your response is no issue? But the officers were already walking back to their patrol car, eager to escape a conversation that was making them confront some uncomfortable truths about their own actions. Angela watched them go, then turned back to Carol, who was still standing in her doorway like she wished she could disappear. Next time, Angela said, her voice carrying across the yard with quiet intensity, maybe consider that the person you're calling about might just be someone's child trying to get home safely. The drive home was quiet except for the hum of the Range Rover's engine and the distant sounds of Denver traffic. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, replaying everything that had just happened. The adrenaline was starting to fade now, replaced by a complex mix of emotions that was harder to process. Anger at being treated like a suspect. Embarrassment at being stopped in front of his neighbors. Exhaustion from having to prove his right to exist in his own community. You okay, sweetheart? Angela asked, glancing over at her son. Marcus shrugged. I don't know. I mean, I knew this kind of thing happened, but experiencing it. He trailed off, watching the houses go by, houses where people lived their lives without ever having to worry about whether their presence in a neighborhood would be seen as suspicious. Angela felt her chest tighten. As a federal judge, she dealt with issues of justice and fairness every single day. She had seen the statistics, read the studies, presided over cases that highlighted systemic bias and discrimination. But watching her own son, a straight-A student, a team captain, a kid who volunteered at the local food bank on weekends, get treated like a suspected criminal had hit her in a way that no courtroom case ever could. What would have happened if you hadn't shown up? Marcus asked quietly. That was the question Angela had been dreading. The question every black parent in America knows but never wants to think about too deeply. She knew the statistics too well. She had seen too many cases cross her desk. She knew how these encounters could escalate, how quickly a routine stop could turn dangerous for a young black man. You did everything right, she said instead, reaching over to squeeze his hand. But it didn't matter, Marcus replied. I was polite, I answered their questions, I didn't resist. And they still searched my bag like I was a criminal. Angela pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine. She sat there for a moment, trying to find the right words. As a mother, she wanted to protect her son from the harsh realities of the world. As a judge, she knew those realities were inescapable. "This isn't about you," she said finally. "This isn't about anything you did or didn't do. This is about fear and prejudice and assumptions people make. And that's not your burden to carry." Marcus nodded, but she could see the weight settling on his shoulders anyway. It was a weight that too many young men like him carried, the knowledge that their mere existence could be perceived as threatening, that their movements through the world would be scrutinized in ways their white peers would never experience. Back in Willowbrook Heights, Carol Whitfield sat in her living room, staring at the phone in her hands. The same phone she had used to call 911. The same phone that could have been the catalyst for a tragedy. For the first time in her life, Carol was being forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about herself. She had always considered herself progressive. She had voted for diverse candidates, donated to civil rights organizations, posted supportive messages on social media during protests. She told herself she wasn't racist. She had black friends, supported black businesses, believed in equality. But today, when she saw a black teenager walking through her neighborhood, her first instinct hadn't been curiosity or indifference. It had been suspicion. Fear. The assumption that he didn't belong, that his presence posed some undefined threat. She kept thinking about Angela Thompson's words. "Next time, maybe consider that the person you're calling about might just be someone's child trying to get home safely." Someone's child. A federal judge's child, as it turned out, but that shouldn't matter. Every young person deserved to walk through any neighborhood without being viewed as a threat. Carol realized she had serious work to do, on herself, on her assumptions, on the unconscious biases she had spent a lifetime accumulating without even realizing it. She had always thought of racism as something overt, something practiced by people in white hoods or those who used slurs openly. She had never considered that her own split-second judgments, her own fears and assumptions, could contribute to a system that made young men like Marcus feel unwelcome in their own communities. Tomorrow, Carol would write a letter to the Thompson family. She would research organizations working on racial justice and bias training. She would attend community meetings and difficult conversations about race and privilege. She would force herself to sit with the discomfort of realizing that good intentions weren't enough if they weren't backed up by genuine self-reflection and change. But tonight, she just sat with the uncomfortable truth of what she had done and who she had revealed herself to be. Here's the thing that makes this story so important, so necessary to talk about. This exact scenario plays out in different variations across America every single day. Sometimes the teenager is walking home from school, sometimes from a friend's house, sometimes from a job. Sometimes the caller is a neighbor, sometimes a store clerk, sometimes just a passerby. Sometimes there's a parent who arrives in time to advocate for their child, and sometimes there isn't. The outcomes vary widely. Some encounters end with apologies and understanding. Others end with arrests, injuries, or worse. The common thread is always the same: the assumption, the split-second judgment that someone doesn't belong, poses a threat, or requires police intervention simply by existing in a particular space. For families like the Thompsons, these incidents are more than isolated events. They are reminders of a reality where success, education, and social standing offer no protection from bias and profiling. Angela Thompson could preside over federal cases, could be mentioned for the Supreme Court, could command respect in the highest levels of government, but she still had to rush to defend her son from assumptions made by a neighbor who didn't know him. For people like Carol Whitfield, these incidents offer opportunities for growth and self-reflection, chances to examine unconscious biases and work toward change. But they also highlight how easily well-meaning people can contribute to systems of oppression through seemingly innocent actions. The question isn't whether Carol is a bad person or whether the officers were intentionally malicious. Most people involved in these situations aren't cartoon villains. They are ordinary people making split-second decisions based on assumptions they might not even realize they hold. The real question is whether we're willing to examine our own assumptions, challenge our own biases, and work toward a world where young people like Marcus can walk through any neighborhood without being viewed with suspicion. Because here's the truth that should keep us all awake at night. The next time someone picks up the phone to report a suspicious teenager, that teenager might not be as fortunate as Marcus Thompson. They might not have a federal judge for a mother. They might not have anyone coming to their defense at all. And that's when these stories stop being cautionary tales and start becoming tragedies. The weight of assumption is heavy, and too often, it falls on the shoulders of those least equipped to carry it. The young, the vulnerable, those just trying to make their way home safely in a world that sees them as threats rather than treasures. Marcus Thompson did everything right that day. He was polite, respectful, cooperative. He answered every question, allowed his belongings to be searched, never raised his voice or showed anger. And still, it almost wasn't enough. Still, he was treated like a criminal until his mother arrived to vouch for his humanity. Think about that for a moment. A 16-year-old honor student had to have his humanity vouched for by a federal judge before 2 police officers would treat him with basic dignity. This is the reality that millions of families live with every day in America. The reality that no amount of success, education, or social standing can fully protect you from other people's assumptions about who you are and where you belong. But here's what gives me hope. Carol Whitfield's story doesn't end with shame and denial. It ends with recognition, with a commitment to do better, to be better. It ends with the understanding that we all have unconscious biases, and that the first step toward change is being honest about them. Every single one of us has the power to be different from Carol's first instinct. Every single one of us can choose curiosity over suspicion, empathy over fear, understanding over assumption. The next time you see someone who doesn't look like they belong, whatever that means to you, remember Marcus Thompson. Remember that they are someone's child, someone's hope, someone's future. Remember that they have every right to walk down any street, shop in any store, exist in any space without having to prove their right to be there. Because until we can create a world where every Marcus Thompson can walk home safely, where every teenager can take a shortcut through any neighborhood without fear, where every parent doesn't have to teach their children how to survive encounters with police, until then, we all carry the weight of assumption. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Thank you for listening to this story. If it made you think, even for a moment, then comment, like it, share it, talk about it, learn from it. Because the next time someone like Carol picks up the phone, the person on the other end might not be as lucky as Marcus. The change starts with us. The change starts with you.